I want to illustrate the way I categorize directors. Good and bad are such subjective terms that I've come up with another paradigm. Also, I've never been in a position to choose the director for a project. So it became more a matter of forewarned is forearmed. Any advanced knowledge you can gain about a director will allow you to be more prepared for those idiosyncrasies over which you have absolutely no control. I mean, you can choose to not accept a contract, but unless the pay is totally crap or there are some other extenuating circumstances, that's usually a matter of cutting off your nose to spite your face. I look at the actor's job as a variation of connecting the dots. The words on the page give us our framework. It's up to the actor to connect those dots. And the director is he who must be trusted to guide the production to a sense of unity and a clear telling of the story. The director will introduce her own set of dots. Some set their dots very far apart. It's almost as if once the casting is complete, their job with the actors is finished and they can spend their time concentrating on production values. I found this to be the case with Wilfrid Leach, who directed The Human Comedy. The only direction I remember getting from Mr. Leach was about adjusting my stance so that I could be seen by more of the audience. Early on in rehearsal, I asked which entrance I should use to get into the playing area to begin a scene with Donnie Kerr. Mr. Leach said, "Well, which entrance would you use?" I picked one and we were on our way. The other end of the spectrum has the director who wants to personally choreograph every movement of the last digit of your pinky. If you've ever heard the term an actor's director, this is not one of those. This director must dictate every aspect, and the actor's job becomes one of imitating whatever the director sees as necessary to her telling of the story. Most fall somewhere in between these two extremes, but good or bad can run the full gamut. It is generally more difficult to please the more choreographic director. They tend to come in with a detailed vision of the finished product, and you as the actor must contribute to the fulfillment of that vision. Those at the other end of the spectrum can be difficult in that it is often a challenge to get them to say anything direct. You have to go with the approach of, well, if she's not saying anything, I must be doing it right. I'm happy to report that I've never worked with one of those megalomaniacs with a riding crop and a patch over one eye who scream every direction at you as if you're completely stupid. I don't doubt that they exist, but I seem to have escaped them. I have dealt with a few that I thought had been promoted to a position several levels beyond their competence. The clearest case of this involved an amazingly important personage in the world of the Broadway musical, one Alan J. Lerner. Yes, he wrote a few of the greatest musicals in the history of the theater, but what he really wanted to do was direct. Go ahead, start cringing. Circa 1980, Alan J. Lerner directed a revival of My Fair Lady in London. It was very well received. Mr. Lerner felt that this bit of directing qualified him to direct the new show that he was writing with Charles Strauss called Dance a Little Closer. It came to be known as Close a Little Sooner. In the London revival of My Fair Lady, Lerner had simply to remount what had been very ably staged in the original by Moss Hart. No lightweight there. But with Dance a Little Closer, it was all new. The staging had never been created for Lerner to recreate. He didn't seem to have a clue. For the most part, the actors had to figure it out for themselves. Lerner couldn't ever explain what he wanted. He could only demonstrate, and his demonstrations were always one of two possibilities. He would either feign the casualness of a rat-pack mobster with a cigarette dangling from his lip, or channel Stanley Kowalski screaming, "Stella!" There was nothing in between. Approach a difficult director the same way you approach any other. Aim for the center of your character and commit yourself to the fulfillment of your role. One of my castmates, a terrific fellow by the name of I.M. Hobson, used military terms like entrenchment. He and his acting partner in the show were entrenching themselves in their characters because they were afraid Mr. Lerner might try to suggest something. If you keep going for the center, and please understand, I'm not suggesting every character is somewhere in the middle of the road. If the center of your character lies somewhere on the fringes of sanity, that is the center you must aim for. Now, as happens on rare occasion, should you find that your director can't find anything that you are doing to be satisfactory, you've come up against a wall. Turn away from the wall. Yes, you can do that. It's never easy. It's kind of like divorce. Even if you're told it was amicable, it can't really have been amicable, but it can be done. I had to tell one director, if that's what you want me to do, you picked the wrong person. Now, where do we go from here? As long as you're involved in a production, the negotiation never fully ends. You may not know that there's a probation period of 5 days written into the production contract. If you've gone all the way through the audition process and are cast in a Broadway show, the production still has the first 5 days of rehearsal to discover that they've made a mistake. I've never seen this option taken, but it does exist. What I have seen is a couple of instances where an actor has been engaged and goes through the rehearsal process and is then sent home. Now, this actor has a firm bit of paperwork on which to stand. The production can't stop paying him. They can take his name out of the program and not allow her to perform the role, but they must pay the performer through the term of his or her contract, or through the final performance, whichever comes first. They also have to pay the person that they've brought in to replace that character. You can understand this is not a path easily chosen by a producer. I never knew that there could be 2 directors for one show. I would have thought that this was impossible. A director has to have a certain amount of ego, and you can't have 2 of those working on the same show and expect anything good ever to come of it. Then came Les Miserables. I don't know how it came to be, but Cameron Mackintosh produced a musical for the West End and for Broadway that had 2 directors, Trevor Nunn and John Caird. I'm from a family of 13 children, and I'm often asked, how did your parents do it? My response has always been, I grew up in the midst of it, and I still don't know. This was an amazing thing to see. Both contributed to the whole. Each had wonderful input. They seemed to finish each other's sentences. It was as if we had one director with 2 bodies that had complementary personalities. There were times when groups would go into different rehearsal rooms, each with one or the other of our guides. I remember John taking the lovely ladies into one rehearsal room while Trevor worked with the gents in the other. We each went through a number of improvisational exercises, developing the feel of that moment in the show. Then the groups were put together and the improvisational work continued. It was a blast. Speaking of improvising, we spent the entire first week of rehearsals without ever looking at a script or one sheet of music. Those exercises I learned in Acting 101, the ones I figured I would never use in any professional circumstance. Well, John Caird and Trevor Nunn spent one full week of our precious rehearsal time developing the feel of our show and building ensemble. Just the way I was taught in school. Good guy, bad guy, build a machine, 3 characters in 10 seconds. We did them all. and they were all tailored for the streets of Paris in the 1830s. In fact, we were instructed to not look at a script or score until instructed. Most of us had heard a good deal of it from the London recording, but we were encouraged to let them lead us through it step by step. After a solid week of theater games, we would be handed the pages from the score that we would be addressing that day, and we would spend the day developing only that part of the show. Now, I had never experienced this kind of approach in the development of a production. I mean, I'd done acting exercises and played theater games, but never had I experienced this type of application. My amazement was only magnified when stagehands came into the rehearsal room and constructed a full-scale turntable. I couldn't believe it. I had thought we would have to work all that stuff out in the theater during tech. And this working turntable had to have an operator. This was a case in which no expense was spared for the things necessary to the full development of this great musical. Sometimes it really is done to the max. We are in a business in which one often hears about people being cruel or catty to one another. The reality shows play this idea up and get great ratings for their efforts. It's easy to see how Joe Public could come away with the perception that everyone climbs all over anyone who gets in their way. It's a harsh business. There's no room for Mr. Nice Guy. This is absolutely not the case. The vast majority of the people that I've come across in the theater have been delightful, good-natured, talented folks who happen to be in a business under a public microscope. I admit that when I came to New York, I was expecting everyone to have a pretty thick crust. I had also been warned about the no-nonsense approach to the study of acting. Every teacher was a ball buster. Be ready for the whipping of your life. I had the good fortune to be invited to take a master class with Sanford Meisner, a madman who still smoked despite having had his larynx removed because of cancer. I had been led to expect an emotional brute who would rend your psyche and reduce every actor to an emotional ash heap. It's just not true. He was pretty serious. He was amazingly succinct. He had lost his voice box and he had to laboriously burp his words when lecturing. But it appeared this had created the circumstance in which nothing was wasted. It took him so long to make a statement that he chose his words very carefully. It was easy to keep up with him if you were taking notes, and we did. He could easily tap into his students' emotional hang-ups. Ladies with father issues, guys with Oedipal troubles. But his strongest ability was his eye for honesty. Don't try and fake out Mr. Meisner. He'll get you. Isn't that exactly what you would wish for in an acting teacher? The whole point of his repetition exercise was to eliminate all of the extraneous stuff and make you focus on what was actually there. Then elements would be added. An activity, urgency, intention, an event just outside the room, a knock at the door. Each of these elements had to have importance to the actor. Nothing would work if there wasn't some kind of strong emotional connection, importance. If the exercise didn't work, Mr. Meisner would ask, "Well, what were you doing?" If the word just fell anywhere in the explanation, Mr. Meisner would quip, "It wasn't important enough." If you were just doing something, it wasn't important enough. You would have to try again next class and do a preparation that had importance for you. That's what I'm leading up to with all this. My favorite Sanford Meisner quote: "Don't just do something. Stand there. If you're just doing this or that, who cares? you don't care enough about it, how do you expect an audience to care?